Welcome to Healing at JWS, blogtalkradio.com. I'm your host, Augustin Anastacio, and Nate's not going to be on today. He's on vacation with the kids, and I was on vacation, I believe, the week prior, and so this is his turn. But we have a special guest that's going to be calling in any minute now, Richard Kelly, and he has written a book called Growing Up in Mama's Club. And let me get some more information on that book. He served 16 years in the Watchtower Society as a Jehovah's Witness. He served some time at the Watchtower headquarters. And the entire title of the book, it's available at freeminds.org, and it's also available at his website. I'm pulling it up right now as we speak. It's richardkelly.com. So I think he's on the air now, so I'm going to go ahead and put him on the air. Hello, Richard, is that you?
Yes, good morning, Gus. How are you today?
Good morning. I'm just really thankful to be having the broadcast this morning. It's been a rigmarole for me this week. We had to reschedule the program and everything, and it almost winded up that I wouldn't be able to do it. But the title of your book is Growing Up in Mama's Club, A Childhood Perspective of Jehovah's Witnesses. Give us an idea of the premise of your book.
I don't know if I would have written the book except for an unfortunate thing that happened. I left Jehovah's Witnesses shortly after I was at Bethel, although I was married to a Jehovah's Witness until 1986. But in 1998, my sister, who had grown up as a Jehovah's Witness, was murdered by her third abusive husband. And my mother did not, because she had left the witnesses about 5 years before that, my mother did not have a funeral, didn't even tell me about it, and I was very upset. I decided that I would write a story. I couldn't write about my sister's life, but I would write about my story growing up in Mama's Club, which I often told my mother that it was like going to a club. It took me several years to finally be able to put together a story that I think is balanced. I first published the book in 2005. It's been revised. There's the second revision, and in 2008, or the second revision was produced. And basically, it's the story of when, at 4 years of age, my mother had someone knock on our door, and 5 months later, she became one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and that was my fate until I was age 20. And so that's what the story and the premise behind the book is.
So how many siblings did you have other than your sister?
I have three. I have a younger brother. I was the oldest child, and two sisters.
And you were all raised as witnesses?
Yes, we were. Mm-hmm.
And so your mom, was she converted to the Jehovah's Witnesses? Did she marry into it, or what was the situation?
She had no religion. They were living in West L.A. Her husband had been in the Air Force, and they were barely scraping along. She had 3 children. Things were not going very well. She tells the story that she started praying to God, prayed for 5 months, and when I was 4 years old, somebody knocked on our door, and it was one of Jehovah's Witnesses. And she intuitively felt that that was God answering her prayer, and it took a while to convince my dad to join her, but 5 months later, in March of 1948, they were baptized, and the rest is history.
Those were was that the Nathan Noor years or the Rutherford years? Rutherford was probably on the decline.
Noor was the president of the society for the, and even when I was at Bethel, Noor was the president.
So, what years did you serve at Watchtower headquarters?
I went to Bethel on May 5 of 1962, and I stayed there for 2 years. I'd been there, I hadn't even been there a year, and I knew that I had to get out. I saw the hypocrisy, the double standards. I saw how policy was formulated. Although I must admit I did enjoy the work. It was an opportunity to develop some self-esteem that I had not had at home, and it was a way to get away from my mother. And that's not too uncommon for several Bethelite experiences as well. But it was in 1962 that I went to Bethel and stayed there until 64.
Are you the oldest of your siblings or the youngest?
Yes, I am.
The oldest. So you said you had a sister and 2 other brothers, right?
Right.
I guess was your sister the youngest, or was she
the youngest is the one that was murdered when she was 49 years of age. And she's actually the one, my mother was baptized when she was born. So she's the only child that, from infancy knew nothing different than the JW experience.
And your mother, she's no longer a Jehovah's Witness.
No, my mother is still alive. She's still one of Jehovah's Witnesses. For about 20 years, she did not speak to me. That changed a little bit. That's a long story. It's a story that I will be publishing a sequel. It's called The Ghosts from Mama's Club. Hope to publish it in September, and it tells that story. But my mother does speak to me on business matters and things like that today. But she will be turn 90 in September.
Did you have any children?
I have children, yes. I have a son and 2 daughters.
And I guess they're older now. They're out of the house.
Yes, yeah. It's 46, 44, and 43. And none of them are Jehovah's Witnesses.
Oh, that's good.
That's right.
That's good news. Were they ever inundated at all at any time?
My wife and I had a challenge raising the children because she wanted to raise them as Jehovah's Witnesses, and I didn't. We did have a pretty good agreement, and they were allowed to go to the Kingdom Hall if they wanted to. They did. My son went to the Kingdom Hall until he was 7, and then he stopped going. And our daughter went to the Kingdom Hall until she was 12, and then she stopped going. And eventually, my wife did leave in 1986. So she now is 25 years free from the Watchtower Society.
Wow. So for a while, you was married to a believing Jehovah's Witness, though.
I was, yes. So I had to experience it in quite a different way than when you're raised, being raised.
Right.
But fortunately, our children, one of the things we both agreed is they were going to go to college, something that I had to do after I left Bethel because that was not a part of the JW curriculum in those days. Still isn't, but.
What was that one point, that one thing, was it prior to Bethel or at Bethel that really made you question whether this was God's organization, as they claim to be, the sole channel from Jehovah God?
Well, even as a child, I was 4 years old, and I had enough information about the world that I always questioned whether it was correct. I wanted to believe it because I loved my mother, and I didn't want to disappoint her, but I always questioned it. And it's like I lived two lives. When I could, I escaped into my world. I had great-grandparents who were not believers, so that gave me an opportunity to escape. My association was always controlled, but I always questioned that this was God's organization. It always seemed like it was a group of men. If you took the time to read the old copies of the Watchtower or the Golden Age or any of the old books, you'd see how prophecy has changed. It just didn't make any sense. When I did go to Bethel, it was like I knew it was the only way to get out of my mother's house, and it was an acceptable way. I enjoyed the work there. I mean, I knew right away. It didn't take long. Actually, the very first day I went to Bethel, I had been had hardly slept. I arrived on a train, and I arrived at about 11 o'clock in the morning, and shortly before lunch would be served, and I did have a meal with the lunch or in the Bethel dining room, and they asked me if I needed to get things in order or would I like to do some work before I was given my assignment. So I said, well, I need to work. Give me something to do. And in those days, Hayden Covington was still a part of the Bethel family.
Right.
And he is somebody, even as a child, his talks always would put, I just felt like, wow, like you would with a real a preacher who has that charisma. He could just say things, not much substance, at least in the talks that he gave. But I was told that I needed to clean his house. He did not live at Bethel on the premises. He lived near in a brownstone, several buildings down the street.
Well, for those who are listening, they don't probably know who Hayden Covington was, but he was the editor for the Herald, wasn't it?
No, he was the attorney. Was the
attorney?
Yes, it actually was the vice president of the society. When Norb became the president, I think it was early in the 40s when Norb became president, and Hayden Covington was the vice president. But he was the society's attorney. He won a lot of cases. He was an appointment by Rutherford. Rutherford actually had Fred Franz, Knorr, and Covington were his three boys that he wanted to make sure they kept together. But my point is that Covington had a drinking problem. He did most of his career, but when I went to clean his house, I heard very vulgar language coming from a room, and I didn't even know it was Covington. He came out. It was maybe 1:30. He was disheveled. I immediately recognized who it was, and he had a wife, two small children, and the language that he used was unbelievable, abusive to his wife. I remember that moment. It's like if there had ever been any doubt in my mind that this was God's organization, it evaporated in that very first day at Bethel. Not that it was a big surprise, but if you're looking for that one moment, it's like when your children are born, you never forget those moments. Well, it's a moment I will never forget.
Well, that also explains why Rutherford was so close to Covington, because Rutherford was also a drunk.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I was with I fellowship with the International Bible Student Association for about a year and a half when I left the organization, and to listen to the older Bible students, they absolutely, and the IBSAers, they absolutely hate Rutherford, first of all, for what he did to the organization. They felt that he is solely responsible for the destruction of Russell and his teachings as far as keeping the corporation together. And and they'll tell you stories of how he would show up even to talks, drunk, inebriated, to give a speech, and that he had bodyguards and he had 2 Rolls Royces and just he was this character, but he was definitely not the standard of holiness if you got to meet him.
No, definitely. I mean, what information that I know from even when I was at Bethel, or the research that our information you can find on the internet, I mean, it's all there. He basically was a narcissist, spiritual man. I just don't see it because, as you said, he dramatically changed those people into a totally different group, which it is today. But anyways, Covington was his hand-picked man, and he was a very competent attorney. There's no question that he won many cases for causes that Jehovah's Witnesses had supported, but both of them, Covington and Rutherford, both had very serious problems with drinking, and their language, unbelievable.
So, was there any particular doctrine that stood out that this was the thing that you realized, there's something wrong with this? Because I mean, the reason why I ask is because you served in Bethel in the years just prior to the big push for 1975. I mean, it's just shy of that. I think 1975 got their big push around 67 or 68. And, I mean, that was the real push years. and probably the only thing I could think of controversial at the time when you was at Bethel that was going through changes was their ban on organ transplants. And, of course, they had by then already, they had now allowed witnesses to accept vaccinations.
You're curious about my opinion as far as doctrines?
Oh, yeah. I mean, was it a particular doctrine, or was it the shunning policy, or the blood issue? I mean, it's always something.
At the time, for me, one of the big significant things was all of this Armageddon is near, it's going to happen. I mean, right. Even when my mother became a JW, there were those who said, 40 years from 1914, that's 1954. I can remember, that was never an official policy by the Watchtower, but several people in the congregation that I grew up in West Los Angeles, that was their idea. Armageddon is going to come. And Rutherford's, slogan, millions now living will never die, was still, the remnants of it was still alive. I mean, I was told many times by growing up, I would never reach the age of 20. This would never happen to me. Obviously, at Bethel, I went when I was 18. It was pretty apparent that this is something that they were going to always be saying. They were apocalyptic in nature. That's just right. It's around the corner. So their idea of predicting the end of the world, I found quite offensive, and it didn't. I mean, I had read the Bible. I've read it many times, but it didn't seem to match with what I had read, but I never considered myself a Bible scholar. Right. And when I was at Bethel, one of the things that was very apparent that Fred France, though he said he was a Bible scholar, it was very obvious if you spent any time with him. He presided over the Monday night Watchtower for Bethelites, and he would just go off on tangents and on things in Scripture, saying that this particular Scripture was fulfilled when Rutherford did this, and it's just all that silliness that human beings come up with, attributing their life somehow to the Bible being fulfilled and what they were doing or saying. Those were all things that bothered me. In terms of doctrinal issues, I just never have personally taken it too seriously. It's like my grandfather told me when I was a child that he says, Dickie, you can tell a man or a woman's religion. It's not by all their beliefs or their dogma. It's how they live their life. And
right.
To me, that's one of the things, even as a child, I mean, the story of Jesus and what he did and how he lived his life and the way he treated women so well. I mean, those types of things resonated with me as opposed to, God is the Trinity or hellfire or those types of doctrines that are
right.
an integral part. It's like certain things didn't seem to, for me, it's like, why worry about things like that? I wanted to be a good person. I wanted to be somebody like Jesus who treated other people fairly,
right.
so those were the things that were important to me, and that's clearly something you did not see at Bethel in particular. The way decisions were made, the way people could be so vindictive to other people. Noah himself was a bully, just a
right.
big bully. He had, at the breakfast, he could just go on and on about some sexual misconducts, giving details, and this intuitively is not. It isn't right. It's not right. So, but in terms of doctrines, coming back to your question, I just things that I never worried about. It's just the way.
It seems like you never really bought into it, the whole scheme. It seems like it's amazing that you made it as far as you did.
Well, I still, at the end of the day, I think that it's how we treat other people. That thing that my grandfather taught me about, that seemed to be so important because there are so many people in the world with different beliefs and different ideas. And, my childhood has obviously felt that a lot of the positives of the Christian principles. I've also seen the negatives as well.
The older that I get, and I claim to be a Christian, and I believe in various doctrines and things of that nature. But the older that I get, I've come to realize what you have just stated, that it's so important to have an unconditional love for people, regardless of what they believe. That's the most motivating force and the most appealing example of Jesus Christ that we could have. I just this week I had a friend email me, and so for some time, me and my wife, we've known that he's gay, and he's been trying to live a celibate life because he understands what the Bible says about homosexuality, and so apparently he hasn't lived as celibate a life as he has, and so he emails me, and he's so terrified about what I'm going to think, and I just came right out with it. I said, look, we love you unconditionally. Whether if you're celibate or actively gay, we love you. We love you because you are you. And when are you going to get that through your thick head?
Good for you.
And that's the most important thing, is that we love you despite whatever you choose to do. And because and that's something that we never received in the Watchtower Society. It's unconditional love, and just the word love. When you say it, you become softened. And just saying the word, it's such an active verb, and such a powerful verb, and that should be the motivating force to unify and build bridges instead of barriers, and that's something that you can't do with doctrine, and I believe in doctrine and all of that, but as I get older, love is such a motivating force behind all of my actions and what I do and how I treat people and how I talk to people. And so, that should be the thing that I think that if people people that consider themselves religious or irreligious can be unified in the fact that we treat each other as mutual, equitable human beings, that we're all human beings in this world. We all have to live together. And we have to accept each other for our different philosophies, and we should love one another, no matter what the differences are.
Yeah, that's pretty heavy, and that's at least for me philosophically, you've zeroed in on where I try to live. You know, all of us miss the mark, but to me, caring for other people, love. It just, there's, like you said, something, you don't even have to, it isn't even an intellectual experience. It's just something that you know somewhere in your heart. It just trumps everything else, you know.
Wow.
I know there's a writer, a Christian writer, John Shelby Spong, who writes about, you know, the power of what Christianity can do if that's what the focus is love.
Right.
Like you said, instead of doctrine, don't focus on doctrine, focus on love. And the power of Christianity just suddenly becomes so obvious.
Right.
But it's something that each one of us have to experience ourselves, like you said, and maybe it's a function of, you use the word, as I get older. When we're younger, we don't always see that, but as you get older, you realize that's really what it's all about. I mean, your family and those people that you love are the new ones that you love.
Right.
I found that it always breaks my heart when I hear about these ex-JWs that become shunned, and, you know, I want to tell them, you know, just bide your time, because you will, if you, you know, start to live your life and meet other people and so forth, you're going to find people that accept you for who you are, that generally will genuinely like you and care for you. It's just that, unfortunately, there are, you know, because of the religious beliefs, Jehovah's Witnesses are unable to do that, you know, so.
I mean, what did Jesus said? He said, he talked about, you know, about being the Good Samaritan. Here, the you know, the one that actually helped the man that was beaten on the road was someone who had a different philosophical and religious opinion,
yeah.
And yet his whole action was, you know, he put the man in a hotel, paid for it, and tended to his wounds and took care of him completely. Here, despite having a different opinion, this man was a Jew that was beaten on the road, and even his own kind wouldn't help him.
Right.
You know, yep. Jesus talks about, as you have done it unto strangers, you know, did you clothe them? Did you feed them? Then you've done it unto me. And so I know as witnesses we were taught, you know, to be uncharitable. We were taught that, you know, that when disaster struck, the Jehovah's Witnesses, you know, they claimed they did exorbitant things for others, but in actuality they made sure they built all the brothers and sisters' homes first in the kingdom halls before they went to the others, you know.
Right.
The little things
right.
they don't tell you, you know, and they tell you don't, you know, participate in charities because that doesn't help God's kingdom, and yet that is what helps God's kingdom. That's what Jesus said. You know, it's charity is the means, is the one means you can help people, because it's an act of love, and it's an act of unconditional love.
Yep.
You know,
that's for sure.
But yeah, so your book takes. I'll tell you one thing. It must have been a lot more difficult growing up as a child in the Jehovah's Witnesses during the years that you grew up than it was for me. I mean, the most that I can remember, and you know, you talk about it when you're amongst other ex-witnesses, is how difficult it is getting up on a Saturday morning to knock on people's doors. Possibly the person behind the door is someone you went to school with, or sometimes, you know, you smell the bacon through the door, and they're having a nice hot breakfast, sitting in their pajamas watching Saturday morning cartoons. But I know when you was growing up, the field work was a lot more aggressive. I mean, I've heard the stories about how the witnesses wore steel-toed shoes so they could put their foot in the door when someone slammed it.
Well,
I've heard all the stories then.
Well, who knows? Everybody, it has a lot to do with your parents and how they interpret the religion. My mother was just a hardcore fanatic, so unfortunately it was field service on Saturday, and even before Tuesday night book study, we were required to go out in the service and then in the evening. And like you said, when you're in your neighborhood and you think about seeing a kid that you see in school or whatever, it is what it is. I mean, I had other JW friends whose parents were not as strict, and so a lot of it depended on, your parents. And for me, it was very severe, but there wasn't a whole lot I could do about it. So as a child, it is your experience, and somehow you try to make the best of it. I can't say, as I look back on my life, I can say there was a lot of positive things that came about from my JW experience and a lot of negative things. You can't change it, so you just make the best of what you experience. And I certainly, even when I wrote Growing Up in Mama's Club and now the sequel, The Ghost from Mama's Club, there's no way that I have tried to make people feel sorry for me. That's never been the purpose of the books. It's just to let people know what it's like from a child's point of view, particularly growing up in Mama's Club. It's one thing, I can honestly say, because my mother needed structure in her life. She needed to know answers to questions that, for me, it's like it's okay. A certain amount of mystery does not bother me, but my mother needed to know. My mother needed to have boundaries and rules and regulations. And Jehovah's Witnesses provided that. What the bad thing is for children, when children don't go to college, or they don't necessarily have to go to college, but at least get a good education so they can have a means for providing their family, learn how to think, which, of course, is something you grew up as a JW as well. You're never taught critical thinking skills. It's just not a part. It's learned by rote. And for most
how I know that education really matters? I work in the government, and I drive for, government officials. And the deputy secretaries that I've been driving around are in my age bracket. And the last one, his name was Howard Rasley. He was the Deputy Secretary of Labor in the last administration. And Howard, I think, was actually 2 years younger than me, and I'm driving him around. So it shows you. He has an education. I'm driving him around, and he's 2 years younger than me, and I don't have the education, and that's why I'm driving him around.
Well, at least you have a sense of humor and can see the irony of it. So obviously, it's not because you don't have a good mind. Because if you're not educated, you're just not educated. It's not. And that's what you see so often with Jehovah's Witnesses. In fact, in my business life, I was fortunate to get a degree, and I bought a small business. I was very, very fortunate and very, very successful. And up until 1981, when they changed the policy, I hired many witnesses, and I found that I had an opportunity with witnesses who had a good mind but had not gone to college, that I could teach them certain things, and that helped my business grow. From when I started, became the vice president and then the president and then the owner of the company, I hired from 1966 until 81 over 20 JWs, and it's kind of like people like yourself who you could see, you're smart, it's just not educated, and I'll help you, where other employers perhaps didn't see that potential,
Well, ironically, though, that's also a standard amongst Jehovah's Witnesses, is that because they don't have a proper education, you'll find that whole companies will hire, once one Jehovah's Witness gets in, they'll recommend others, and so that you'll have a whole department of Jehovah's Witnesses in a particular company. I know right here in Washington, D.C., Arthur Anderson, I think, is a printing company. And a lot of elders and ministerial servants work for Arthur Anderson because one has referred the other. And Jehovah's Witnesses tend to be good workers, but, this also enables, because there's so many Jehovah's Witnesses working there, for them to be able to get off of meetings and different shifts because they can all cover for one another, from different congregations. So, if you're an elder and you need to do the Tuesday night meeting and you're an elder in another congregation who has the service meeting on a Thursday, you can work together to make your shifts.
Right. No, I think there's a certain amount of truth to it, but I also see, having been the employer, that they can be very clannish, Jehovah's Witnesses, because they don't know how, other than if they're preaching to somebody, they don't know how to blend well with non-JWs.
Right.
They're taught that non-JWs are evil and somehow the devil is lurking there, and they all fornicate, and that's basically the stereotype they'd like to give to everybody, when in fact that is not the case. But
I think we have one caller on there, and he's been on hold for a while, so I just want to go ahead and see if he has any questions to ask you.
Okay.
Caller 520, you're on the air. Hello? Caller? Okay, they might be just listening to the program. Okay, well, we'll just continue the discussion. So, you wrote this book. You revised it, you said, twice. Why do you think you needed to revise the book? When
I wrote my first book, the first edition of Growing Up in Mama's Club, I was amazed at the amount of questions that I received from people. They wanted to know this. They wanted this kind of information. What happened? People wanted to know more about my experiences at Bethel and things like that. So I thought, wow, I was encouraged by that. And so I wrote a second edition and published it. Again, more and more comments from people. People ask, well, can you give us a brief history of, obviously I call the Watchtower Society of Jehovah's Witnesses Mama's Club, but can you give us a history? So each time it was in response to readers who wanted to know more information. And so anyways, that's why it's been revised twice, and the current book that you can buy at Amazon or Barnes & Noble or any bookstore is the second edition.
So let me just let me give out the book is at your site, which is richardekelly.com/order.html. That's where they can order the book, or at freeminds.org, or at Amazon. Right? You said Amazon.
Right.
Barnes
or they
Noble
can go to any Barnes & Noble bookstore. Unfortunately, Borders is out of business. They can order at any bookstore, and it's also on Kindle. If they have a Kindle, you can do that through Amazon.
That was the downfall of Borders, is the fact that most people order books now online, and I'm guilty of that too. So.
Well, I guess it's like any business; you've got to keep up with the times. And
well, they tried. They had a nice little coffee house. They have Wi-Fi now, but I guess it things come and go. It's printing. Newspapers.
The world's
now.
changing. The world's changing. I mean, my wife got an iPad too, and she's not a very computer savvy person, but they're so intuitive today that she's just taken to it, and you can order books. I mean, it's like boom, boom, boom. Although maybe it's my age, I'm 67, but I still, to me, going to a Barnes & Noble for an afternoon is like a kid going into a candy store. You know, it's something
Right.
I still enjoy, but I may be dating myself because you can, everything electronically these days. But
Well, you actually dated yourself when you said you served in Bethel during the Nathan Noy years. So.
Right. Yep. Yeah. Well, I mean, he passed away in '75, so.
At least for Jehovah's Witnesses, we know how long ago that was.
Yeah. No, it's amazing how quickly that time goes by.
Yeah.
All of us, as we get older, it happens so quickly.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, you're right about that. Just seems like yesterday I was in the Witnesses, but that was 13 years ago. But so your wife, how did you meet your wife? You met her.
Well, I actually met her in an assembly in 1959, and it was in Rapid City, South Dakota. And we talked, and right off the bat, I said, "Let's get to know each other." We left the assembly grounds and went to a park, and we started talking. And she's 2 years older than I was. I was 15. She was 17.
You're like me. I like older women. My wife is a year older than me.
Yes, who knows? But anyways, it's. So we started letter writing back and forth, and when I decided to leave the Witnesses, I thought, okay, I did not want to be alone, and I knew I could make it in New York City, and the summer of 1963, I asked her to marry me and explained to her what I saw at Bethel and my concerns, et cetera, and she liked the idea of living in New York City, and so then we were married 5 years later, and just several weeks after I left Bethel, and we left New York City when we expected our first child. We lived there for 13 months. But so I just thought it would be a simple thing, even though she had been, her mother became a witness when she was 13, but she did not want to leave the organization like me, and we actually, things worked out fairly well. She was not too overly concerned, but when you have children, things do change. You
Right.
start to realize that, here's what I really believe about the world. So that's when we started having conflicts. But fortunately, she's left the Jehovah's Witnesses in '86, and
now, was she raised a witness? Her mom
no,
was a witness?
her mother became a convert when my wife was 13 years of age.
Oh, okay.
And it took a while, but actually the assembly that I met her in 1959, she was not baptized. And that's why I thought, this is the right one for me, but she did get baptized after that assembly. And but she was
what about
influenced by her mother.
Her father, did he convert?
No, he never converted, and that was a big issue for my wife's mother. He just would not change. He actually went he was at the 1953 assembly, and he went to a few meetings, and it just didn't match up with his sense of right and wrong, and there was a lot of problems. He unfortunately died in 1968, and he was never a JW.
But he wasn't a religious person or anything like that.
No, not really. He had immigrated from the Netherlands, and he had some exposure to the Dutch Reformed Church, but he actually could not afford to send his kids to Christian school, where they raised the kids in Holland, Michigan, and so that put him on outs with Dutch Reformed, Christian Reformed in West Michigan, and so that it wasn't that he read his Bible and he considered himself a Christian, but he just didn't feel like he had to go to a church in order to practice his beliefs.
Did she have any siblings that are that
no,
also
my wife
were
had,
they?
she has older sister who is not a JW. She has older brother who's become a convert and will not speak to her. She has a twin brother who became a convert, will not speak to her. She's never been disfellowshipped, but because she doesn't go to the meetings. And then she has a younger sister, 6 years younger. Ironically, is married to my brother, and they do not speak to us. They haven't spoken to us since.
It's amazing how just family members that are Jehovah's Witnesses can go above and beyond the organization's rules for shunning. I mean, it's like I guess they feel like they're going the extra mile for Jehovah. So,
Gus, you're right, and I mean that doesn't make any sense, but that's clearly what it is. They think they're doing it for the Gipper. I mean, they think they're doing it for Jehovah. I mean, it doesn't. It defies logic, but that's at the end of the day. I mean, that's if they kept a diary, that's what they'd be writing, stuff like that.
Ironically, that's a very Pharisaical way of thinking, isn't it? Because that's exactly what the Pharisees did. Well, they thought they were doing extra for Jehovah by.
I mean, it is quite amazing, but I mean, it is the power of brainwashing. It's what happens that when somebody just pounds that stuff into you over and over and over, and misinformation is just massive with JWs. Misinformation, and once it becomes part of your psyche, you're just unable to think any longer. And,
right.
And, I mean, how
they do it with everything. They do it with all the doctrines, especially with the blood doctrine now.
That makes no sense whatsoever. That was one of the issues when we had children. I said, I think it's something that every parent has to consider. Just don't rush into a blood transfusion because you can do it needlessly. But, I mean, there's a point where that's the only way a child's going to survive, or anybody. I mean, what alternative do you have? And to take the scriptures that they do and try to discombobulate them to say that this is the God, the creator of the earth and heavens and blah, 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 this is what will make him happy, it just defies any kind of a thinking skills. That's why, JWs, their lack of critical thinking skills works against them, because that's just so. I mean, you can see it. You said you've been out 13 years. Is that what you said? 13 years.
Yeah.
You can see it clearly, but when you were locked in, it's hard for people to see it.
I had two elders that when I went to my first church, it was a small country church, and they would meet me and the pastor in the basement. And now the thing is that the blood doctrine that they have is so confusing for them. Even the elders are completely amiss as to what exactly it is. I mean, unless you're on the liaison committee, I don't think as an elder you have very little to no understanding of what it is the Watchtower Society exactly bans. That's a disfellowshipping offense for Jehovah's Witnesses to use as far as components of blood.
I know.
So I went to their brochure, and I went to the back of it, and I showed the elder there. I said, I'm glad that you guys have come a long way, because now you accept certain components of blood. He says, no, we don't. I said, yes, you do. Look, right here it says that the minor components is a conscientious decision, right here. And then it lists the 5 components that are banned, and these are the components that are acceptable. And he says, no, you're reading it wrong. I said, no, I'm not. It's right there. It says it's a conscientious decision, so that means you accept some form of blood or certain parts of blood. He says, no, we don't accept any part of blood. and that's what it is. The mentality is, I think, because it's so confusing, it's just so easy to take on that when in doubt, do without mentality. And so the average Jehovah's Witness, even though information has come basically submitting that they're allowed to take all of the components of blood as long as they're separated. Pretty much that's the policy now.
Yeah, you're Yep. What you say is exactly right. But just an interesting sidebar. I've spent time with Ray France and any XJW. I mean, the one primer you have to read is Ray France's book.
Right.
I mean, it's just an awesome book. And if you knew Ray France, I mean, this guy is the real deal. I mean,
right.
for anybody that leaves Jehovah's Witnesses and says, okay, I want to be a Christian, I mean, try to follow in Ray France's footsteps, because he was the real deal. But in his books and also in his various writings, and those of us have had a chance to chat with him, he tells one of the stories years ago when he was part of the governing body. Of course, they had a big number. Today, I think it's just 6 that are in the governing body, but in those days there may have been as many as 17. I can't remember, but they actually voted on the blood to recall that policy, and
right.
it was like 67% said, yeah, let's repeal the blood transfusion. But because it's part of the corporate mandate in the I don't know if it's the Pennsylvania Corporation or the New York Corporation
right.
that sets policy, that because it wasn't 75%, they couldn't
right.
change, overrule the policy, which says something, should say something to any JW. But kind of like what you were just talking about, it's there, it's facts, but you share that with the JW, they'll just say, nope, it's not true. No, it's not. When in fact, I mean, it's like a court record, or there's court records about what Rutherford said and what he did, and there's things that they just refuse to look at it. I mean, it's like, for some reason, they're going to lose their faith if they just take one small step to look at the facts. It's just quite amazing, and then leads you to kind of realize that, I guess it's, at the end of the day, it's not something that is going to happen intellectually, because they're just unable to get past, that bit of information that's locked in their head.
It's I forgot. There's what they call it. They call it cognitive dissonance. That's the psychological word for it.
Yes, correct. That's it.
The ability to hold 2 contradictory opinions.
Yes.
Simultaneously.
Yeah, no, that is it's almost like it's a doctor's gone in and removed it, surgically removed, their ability to do it as part of the regimen of becoming a JW, and it's not only, well, you have to get baptized, but we have to remove a portion of your brain that allows you to, as you say, hold 2 conflicting ideas at the same time. They can't do it. Yeah.
I'm going to try this caller again, because we're almost going to be off the air, and I just want to give him another shot. 520, you're on the air. Do you want to ask a question or have a comment? Hello? Hello? Okay, I think they just want to listen. All right, well, we only have about 2 minutes left, and I just wanted to make sure to plug the book again and let everyone know where they can get it. It's the book is Growing Up in Mama's Club, A Childhood Perspective of Jehovah's Witnesses. Richard Kelly is the author, and you can go to his website at richardekelly.com, or the specific link is richardekelly.com/order.html. You can find it on Amazon. You can go on freeminds.org, which is Randy Waters' site, and it's available there. And I just want to thank you for coming on the broadcast and sharing your story, Richard. And we hope that it will help many people, and I'm sure it will. We get a lot of people who are listening in. They listen to it. They download it on iTunes, the archives. And sorry I had to switch up in the middle of the week on you.
No problem, Gus. Well, it's been nice to chat with you and to get to know you better, and my very best to you and your associates in your ministry and what you're trying to do. And it's nice to see that there are other ex-JWs that have a life and are really trying to help other people and be good
Right.
people.
Well, that's the whole point. I mean, we're not angry at Jehovah's Witnesses. We
No, of
view
course
them
not.
as we actually view them as victims, and
exactly.
And so the point of the program is not to harm Jehovah's Witnesses or to offend them, but to let them know we care about them. We're sharing our stories, and hopefully it will get them to investigate and examine openly the religion that they're in. We feel that the religion is harmful to themselves and to others. I've had Barbara Anderson here on the air. I've had Bill Bowen, and we've talked about the issue of pedophilia. We've talked about several issues, several ways that the Jehovah's Witnesses are that makes them cultic. I may have some doctrinal issues with the Jehovah's Witnesses, but really the bottom line is that they would be just another religion if it was not for their shunning policy, which is extreme. It breaks up families. It destroys families. And so, I pray for Jehovah's Witnesses, and I care about them because my family are Jehovah's Witnesses, and your family, you have family that are Jehovah's Witnesses. Our next broadcast is going to be August 20th for those that are our listeners. And we have a special guest, Dr. Rudy Gonzalez from Southwestern Baptist Seminary. He was on the DVD In the Name of Jehovah, and so he's going to be our guest and discuss some of the things he discussed on the DVD that was produced a couple years back by the North American Mission Board. And we're looking forward to having Dr. James Penton in September. So those that are listeners, be prepared to have. I think James Penton is going to be a really, really good one. He's written a book called Apocalypse Delayed: The Story of Jehovah's Witnesses. It's probably the second book that I read, apart from Ray's book, Crisis of Conscience. He's a great Watchtower historian. So thank you again for coming on the air, Richard. And we just want to encourage those that are listening to pray for Jehovah's Witnesses and don't close your doors on them. Open them up. Give them some water, ice cold water on a summer's day like today. Treat them with kindness, and you will belie the ideas that they have of people like you behind the doors. Thank you again.
Thanks, Gus.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Bye.